Welcome to Monk's Temple. Let's begin by simply arriving. Wherever you are right now, lying in bed, sitting on a couch, driving in your car, or staring out a window, take one conscious breath. Just one. Breathe in slowly, and as you exhale, let your eyelids grow heavy. Soften your jaw. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. There's nothing you need to do right now. There's nowhere you need to be. This time is yours. Now imagine a wide, open field. It's a field you've known since childhood. Maybe it's a real place from memory, or maybe it's just a feeling. The grass is soft, and a gentle breeze moves through it. In the middle stands a mailbox. An old, weathered, wooden mailbox, standing alone. Every day of your life, you walk to that mailbox and open it, hoping to find a letter. The one letter that will explain everything. Who you really are. Why you're here. What you're supposed to do with your life. You check it morning and night. You've checked it for years, decades even. And every single time, it's empty. This is the human condition. We are all waiting for the letter. Waiting for meaning to be delivered to us, pre-written, with clear instructions. We want the answer from outside. From God. From the universe. From our parents, partners, professors, gurus. We want meaning to arrive like a package we ordered. But the mailbox stays empty. And that emptiness can feel terrifying. It can feel like proof that there is no meaning. That life is just a random accident. The existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre looked into that empty mailbox and felt the cold wind of absurdity. They said there is no letter. There never was. There's just you and this empty field. You are completely free. And that freedom feels like a curse because if there's no script, you have to write it yourself. But what if we've been looking in the wrong direction? What if the mailbox was never the point? What if meaning isn't in a letter but in the walk to the mailbox? In the grass under your feet? In the breeze on your skin? In the fact that you are there, conscious, aware, alive? This is where the Buddha offers a radical shift. He didn't look for the letter. He sat under a tree and paid attention to what was already here. He saw that searching for fixed, external meaning is what causes our suffering. The emptiness isn't in the mailbox. The emptiness is in the waiting. Psychologically, when you wait for something, you're never fully where you are. Your mind projects into the future. You're in a state of lack. Telling yourself you'll be complete when the letter arrives. This perpetual waiting is a low-grade chronic anxiety. The background hum of modern life. Waiting for the weekend. The promotion. The right relationship. Waiting to finally figure it out. The Buddhist path is stopping the wait. Turning away from the mailbox and looking at the field. Realizing you're not a character waiting for the plot. You're the author. The page isn't blank because it's empty. It's blank because it's full of potential. If you're tired of waiting for the letter, if you're ready to stop checking the mailbox and start exploring the field, please subscribe to Monk's Temple. It's a small way of telling yourself you're ready to become the author of your own life. Consider burnout. People work to exhaustion chasing the next goal. Get the promotion, immediately wait for the next. Buy the house, immediately worry about the mortgage. Find a partner, immediately fear the relationship failing. Running on a treadmill toward a destination that keeps moving. Why? Because they believe the destination holds meaning. They believe the letter waits at the finish line. But when they arrive, the mailbox is empty. So they build another mailbox further down the road and keep running. This is the trap of the 8 worldly winds the Buddha described. Gain and loss. Pleasure and pain. Praise and blame. Fame and disrepute. We spend our lives trying to catch the favorable winds and avoid the unfavorable ones. Building our meaning on shifting sands. Telling ourselves if we achieve enough gain, we'll be secure. If we experience enough pleasure, we'll be happy. If we get enough praise, we'll feel worthy. But the winds always change. Gain today, loss tomorrow. Praise from one person, blame from another in the same conversation. Building your house on these winds is building a sandcastle at the ocean's edge. Beautiful for a while. But the tide always comes in. And you're left wondering where your meaning went. The point isn't that gain, pleasure, praise, and fame are bad. The Buddha wasn't a masochist. The point is that if you attach your meaning to these things, you hand your happiness over to conditions you cannot control. Like handing your paycheck to a stranger hoping they'll return it. The path of genuine happiness is finding a source of well-being the winds cannot touch. And that source is your own awareness. The quality of your own mind. The winds can affect your bank account, reputation, physical body. But they cannot touch the part of you that simply watches. If you're caught in a storm of blame, you can still breathe. Still feel your feet on the floor. Still notice thoughts passing through. The part that notices the storm is not wet. Not cold. Not harmed. That's the part the Buddha discovered. That's the part always already home. The practice is learning to live from there. Let me tell you about Marcus. He was a corporate lawyer in Chicago who made partner at 37. Corner office on the 42nd floor overlooking the lake. Black Porsche. Suits costing more than most people's rent. By every external measure, Marcus had caught the favorable winds. Gain, pleasure, praise, fame. And yet, he would sit in that office some days feeling like he was suffocating. Closing his door, putting his head in his hands, wondering, is this really it? His wife dragged him to a meditation retreat. Not because he wanted to go, but because she said their marriage needed it. Marcus sat on a cushion for the first time, and his mind was a tornado. Checking emails under the table. Obsessing about cases. Looking at the peaceful person next to him and feeling like a failure at sitting still. Then the teacher said something that cracked him open. She said, "You are not your thoughts. You are the one noticing your thoughts." Marcus had spent his entire life believing he was his thoughts. His ambitions, strategies, worries, plans. The idea that a part of him could simply watch all that mental noise without being consumed, that was revolutionary. A worry would arise, and instead of grabbing it, he'd note, thinking. A memory of failure would appear, and he'd note, remembering. By weekend's end, his problems weren't solved. But they felt lighter. Less like weights chaining him down. More like clouds passing through a vast sky. Marcus tasted unborrowed happiness. Not from promotion or possession. From discovering he was the sky, not the cloud. This discovery sits at the heart of what the Buddha taught. He didn't invent religion or claim to be divine. He simply pointed to something always true but forgotten. The nature of awareness itself. And he showed that this awareness, when cultivated, becomes a source of well-being the 8 worldly winds cannot touch. But how do we actually do this? How do we stop being the cloud and start being the sky? The answer lies in 4 instruments of a flourishing life. Think of them not as goals to achieve but as instruments in an orchestra. When tuned and playing together, the music of meaningful life emerges naturally. First instrument is ethical integrity. Not rule following for reward or punishment. Understanding that how you act shapes your mind in real time. When you lie, you create disturbance haunting your meditation. When you harm others, you build walls of guilt and fear blocking peace. Ethical integrity means living so that when you sit to be still, there's nothing to defend and nothing to hide. Second instrument is a peaceful heart. What we usually call happiness, but a specific kind. Contentment not dependent on things being perfect. Feeling okay even when life is messy. Cultivated by releasing constant craving for things to be different. The joy of warm tea on a cold morning. Comfort of a familiar song. Simple pleasure of a deep breath. Always available, but overlooked while chasing bigger things. Third instrument is living in truth. Commitment to see clearly. Understand your own mind. We spend lives lost in assumptions and unconscious patterns. Reacting to world based on old tapes playing in heads. Living in truth means asking, is this thought actually true? Is this belief accurate or just habit? This is meditation's path. Watching thoughts arise and pass without getting swept away. Seeing thoughts aren't facts. They're mental visitors passing through awareness. Fourth instrument is compassionate contribution. Flowing naturally from the first 3. When you live with integrity, heart peaceful, seeing clearly, the question, what can I give, arises spontaneously. You realize your well-being connects to everyone else's. The separate self pursuing private happiness is revealed as illusion. Compassionate contribution isn't grand gestures. It's listening fully to a struggling friend. Smiling at a stressed cashier. Bringing full attention to your work. Leaving every space better than you found it. Consider Elena, a high school English teacher in the Bronx. Her students arrived hungry, distracted, carrying unimaginable trauma. Elena could have collected her paycheck and counted years to retirement. Instead, she showed up daily with mission. 10 minutes each morning sitting quietly, breathing, setting intention to be kind. When a student acted out, she didn't just send them to the principal. She breathed. Remembered her intention. Tried seeing pain behind behavior. Exhausted after school, she'd stay late helping struggling students with essays. Elena wasn't rich or famous. Her work never made newspapers. But she was among the most fulfilled people I've known. She discovered unborrowed happiness. Not in salary or status. In the quality of her presence with those kids. In small connection moments. A student finally understanding a poem. A teenager trusting her with pain. A shy kid smiling when she greeted them by name. Elena's life had meaning because she brought meaning to it. She didn't wait for the letter. She wrote it herself, one compassionate act at a time. Now I want to share something that might feel uncomfortable. We've been talking about the empty mailbox and the 4 instruments. But there's a deeper layer here that most spiritual teachings skip over. It's the layer of genuine despair. Because before you can build anything real, you have to be willing to let the old structures collapse. There was a woman named Grace who came to a retreat I was assisting at years ago. Grace was in her late 40s, meticulously dressed, with a smile that seemed permanently attached to her face. But her eyes told a different story. They looked exhausted. On the third day, during a walking meditation period, she just stopped walking and started sobbing. Right there on the path. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Some of the other participants looked uncomfortable, wanting to help, wanting to fix it. But the guiding teacher just sat down on the grass nearby, not saying anything, just being present. When Grace finally stopped crying, the teacher asked gently, "What were you touching just now?" And Grace said, "The truth. For the first time in my life, I touched the truth. I've been pretending for 30 years. Pretending my marriage was happy. Pretending my career was fulfilling. Pretending I was okay. And underneath all that pretending, there was just this vast emptiness. I've been running from it my whole life, and I finally stopped running. It felt like dying." The teacher smiled. Not a cruel smile. A compassionate one. And she said, "Good. Now the real work can begin." This is a critical point. The Buddhist path doesn't start with affirmation and positive thinking. It starts with acknowledging the dukkha. The unsatisfactoriness. The gnawing sense that something is missing. Most of us spend our lives building elaborate distractions to avoid feeling that emptiness. We fill our schedules, our homes, our relationships, our minds with noise. We keep the television on. We keep scrolling. We keep achieving. All to avoid sitting still for 5 minutes with that empty feeling. But here's what Grace discovered. When she finally stopped running and let herself feel the emptiness, it didn't destroy her. It actually opened her up. The emptiness wasn't a void to be feared. It was space. Space that had been crammed full of pretending. And in that space, something new could grow. This is the psychological insight beneath Buddhist practice. The mind that avoids pain actually multiplies pain. The effort to suppress uncomfortable feelings creates tension, anxiety, depression. But the mind that turns toward pain with curiosity and kindness finds that pain is not solid. It's just energy. And energy, when fully felt, eventually passes. Let me tell you about a different kind of story now. About a man named James who worked in tech support. James spent 8 hours a day on the phone with angry customers. People yelling at him because their internet was down, their printer wasn't working, their email was hacked. By the end of each day, James felt like he'd been emotionally sandblasted. He'd come home, pour a drink, and stare at the TV until bedtime. Then wake up and do it again. One day, a friend dragged him to a mindfulness workshop. James was skeptical. He thought mindfulness was for people who didn't have real problems. But he went anyway. The instructor talked about something called the second arrow. This is an old Buddhist teaching. The first arrow is the actual painful event. A customer yells at you. That hurts. That's the first arrow. The second arrow is the one you shoot yourself. The story you add. I shouldn't have to deal with this. This job is destroying me. My life is miserable. This will never end. The second arrow is the resistance, the rumination, the self-pity. And here's the crucial point, the first arrow is inevitable. Life will always involve some pain. But the second arrow? That's optional. That's entirely your own creation. James started experimenting with this at work. A customer would start yelling, and James would feel that initial sting. That was the first arrow. Then he'd notice the urge to add a story. The urge to get defensive, to feel sorry for himself, to mentally escape. And instead of following that urge, he'd just breathe. He'd say to himself, okay. This is uncomfortable. This is the first arrow. I don't need to shoot the second one. He kept doing his job, kept being helpful, but without adding the layer of suffering on top of the pain. Within a few weeks, something shifted. The job hadn't changed. The customers were still angry. But James was different. He wasn't carrying the weight of those second arrows home with him anymore. He'd come home, maybe still tired, but not emotionally destroyed. He had more energy for his kids. He started cooking again, something he used to love. He discovered that while he couldn't control the first arrow, he had complete power over the second. And that power changed everything. This is what the Buddha meant when he said, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the first arrow. Suffering is the second, the third, the fourth arrows we keep shooting at ourselves long after the initial wound. The path of mindfulness is the path of learning to stop shooting. Let me introduce you to someone named Patricia. Patricia was a hospice nurse in Portland for over 20 years. If you want to understand what truly matters in life, spend time with people who are leaving it. Patricia had sat beside hundreds of people in their final days. She'd held their hands, listened to their confessions, witnessed their last breaths. And she noticed something striking. Nobody on their deathbed ever said, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. Nobody said, I wish I'd bought a bigger house. Nobody said, I wish I'd worried more about what people thought of me. Instead, they talked about love. They talked about moments of genuine connection. They talked about things they'd left unsaid, apologies they'd never made, forgiveness they'd never offered. They talked about the small things, a sunset they'd barely noticed, a child's laugh they'd taken for granted, a quiet morning with coffee that they'd rushed through to get to somewhere more important. Patricia learned something from these deathbed confessions. She learned that a meaningful life isn't built from grand achievements. It's built from the quality of your presence in ordinary moments. And she started living that way herself. Not waiting for some future date when she'd finally be happy. Not postponing joy until retirement. But finding it right where she was. In the warmth of sunlight through a window. In the weight of her cat curling up on her lap. In the simple act of brewing tea with attention instead of rushing through it. This brings us to a profound misunderstanding about happiness. We treat it like a destination. Like something we'll reach after we check enough boxes. After we get the right partner, the right job, the right body, the right bank account. But happiness isn't a destination. It's a manner of traveling. It's not something you find at the end of the road. It's something you bring to the road itself. Think about it psychologically. When you believe happiness is somewhere in the future, you're never fully present where you are. You're always leaning forward, always reaching, always waiting. This creates a chronic state of dissatisfaction. Even when good things happen, you barely register them because you're already focused on the next thing. The promotion comes, and instead of celebrating, you're worrying about the next level. The relationship starts, and instead of enjoying it, you're anxious about whether it will last. The Buddhist perspective flips this completely. It says the present moment is the only place where life actually happens. The past is memory. The future is imagination. But this moment, right here, right now, this is real. And if you're not fully here, you're missing your life. Let me tell you about a man named Carlos. Carlos was a chef in New York City. He'd worked his way up from washing dishes to running the kitchen at a famous restaurant. His days were 16 hours of chaos. Orders flying in, staff yelling, plates crashing, temperatures to check, sauces to adjust. Carlos lived on adrenaline and caffeine. He was successful by any standard, but he was also exhausted and irritable and secretly miserable. Then one day, he cut his hand badly on a mandolin slicer. The cut was deep enough to require surgery and months of rehabilitation. He couldn't work. For the first time in 20 years, Carlos had nothing to do. No orders to fill. No staff to manage. No emergencies to handle. Just empty days stretching ahead. The first week, he was climbing the walls. The second week, depression set in. But sometime during the third week, something shifted. He started taking slow walks in his neighborhood. He'd never noticed the trees before. Never noticed the way light fell on buildings in the late afternoon. Never heard the birds. He started sitting on his small balcony with coffee, just watching the world go by. No agenda. No urgency. Just being there. When his hand healed enough to return to work, Carlos made a decision. He still ran the kitchen, but differently. He built in moments of pause. A minute of silence before service started. Actually tasting the food instead of just checking it off. Looking his cooks in the eye and thanking them instead of barking orders. The restaurant didn't suffer. If anything, it got better. The food improved. The team stopped turning over so quickly. And Carlos, for the first time, actually enjoyed his life. Carlos discovered what Patricia the hospice nurse already knew. The present moment isn't a barrier between you and happiness. It's the only place happiness can ever be found. You can't experience joy in the future. You can only experience it now. You can't feel love in the past. You can only feel it now. Everything real happens in this moment. Let's talk about something we all carry but rarely examine. Our stories. The narratives we tell ourselves about who we are. I am the kind of person who fails at relationships. I am unlucky. I am not good enough. I am broken. Or the opposite. I am successful. I am smarter than others. I deserve better. These stories feel like absolute truth. But if you look closely, you'll see they're just stories. Mental habits repeated so often they've become invisible. There was a woman named Chloe who came to a retreat carrying a heavy story. She was 32, beautiful, accomplished, and completely convinced she was unlovable. She'd had a series of failed relationships, each ending the same way. She'd get close to someone, then find a reason to push them away. He's not ambitious enough. He's too needy. He doesn't understand me. On the surface, she was just selective. But underneath, she was terrified. Terrified of being truly seen. Terrified of being abandoned. Terrified that if someone really knew her, they'd leave. Chloe's story started in childhood. Her father left when she was 7. He didn't just leave. He disappeared. No calls, no letters, no explanation. Her young mind couldn't process that as his failure. It processed it as hers. Something must be wrong with me. If I were good enough, he would have stayed. That belief became the lens through which she saw everything. Every relationship confirmed it. Every rejection, every disappointment, every failed romance was more proof that she was fundamentally unlovable. During the retreat, Chloe had a breakthrough. Not through analyzing her past, but through sitting still and watching her mind. She noticed how the story would arise. She'd be sitting quietly, breathing, and suddenly a thought would appear. You're alone because no one wants you. And then the feeling would follow. A tightness in her chest. A sinking in her stomach. And then more thoughts. This will never change. You'll always be alone. But this time, instead of believing the thought, she just watched it. She noticed it as an event in consciousness. Not as truth, but as a mental habit. And in that watching, something shifted. The thought lost its power. It was still there, but it was just a cloud passing through. Not the whole sky. Not even a permanent feature of the sky. Just a temporary formation, appearing and eventually disappearing. This is what the Buddha meant by liberation. Not freedom from circumstances. Freedom from the stories that interpret those circumstances. Freedom from the belief that your thoughts are telling you the truth about who you are. Let me tell you about another person. His name was David, and he was an architect. David was successful but perpetually anxious. He lived in a state of low-grade panic that something terrible was about to happen. The firm would lose its biggest client. He'd get cancer. His wife would leave him. His mind was a catastrophe generator, constantly scanning for threats, constantly imagining worst-case scenarios. David tried everything to manage this anxiety. Therapy. Medication. Exercise. Healthy eating. Nothing fully worked. Then someone suggested he try meditation, and David was skeptical. He thought meditation was for people who didn't have real problems. But he was desperate enough to try anything. The first few months were frustrating. He'd sit down, and within seconds, his mind would be off to the races. A worry about a project. A memory of something embarrassing he'd said 10 years ago. A fear about his health. He'd spend the whole session lost in thought, only realizing at the end that he hadn't been present for a single breath. But he kept going. And slowly, something began to shift. He started noticing the gap. The tiny space between one thought and the next. It was just a fraction of a second at first. But in that gap, there was peace. Not the absence of thought, but the awareness that existed before thought. He started extending that gap. Not by force, but by gentle attention. By learning to rest in awareness itself instead of constantly jumping onto the next thought train leaving the station. One day, a big worry arose. A client was threatening to sue. In the past, this would have sent David into a spiral of panic lasting days. This time, something different happened. The worry arose, and he felt the familiar tightness. But instead of getting on the train, he just watched it leave the station without him. He stayed on the platform. The worry was still there, moving away into the distance, but he wasn't on board. He was able to deal with the situation practically, without the added layer of catastrophic suffering. David discovered what Chloe discovered. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. And that awareness is untouchable. Unharmed by anything that passes through it. Always already at peace. Now I want to tell you about a man named Richard. Richard was a financial advisor in Boston. He was good at his job, not because he loved it, but because he was terrified of failure. He worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. He checked emails at dinner, on weekends, during family vacations. His wife stopped asking him to be present because she'd given up. His kids learned not to expect him at their games or recitals. Richard told himself he was doing it for them. For their future. For their security. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was running. Running from the fear that if he stopped, if he slowed down, he'd have to feel something he'd been avoiding his whole life. That something finally caught up with him on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in his office, alone, reviewing a client's portfolio, when suddenly he couldn't breathe. His heart was racing. His palms were sweating. He thought he was having a heart attack. An ambulance came, sirens blaring, and rushed him to the emergency room. After hours of tests, the doctor gave him the diagnosis. Not a heart attack. A panic attack. His body had finally said no. It had finally refused to keep running. Richard was referred to a therapist who also happened to be a Buddhist practitioner. The therapist didn't just talk about childhood wounds or cognitive patterns. She taught him to sit. To just sit with whatever was there without trying to fix it. Richard found this infuriating at first. He was a fixer. That was his identity. Give him a problem and he'd solve it. But this problem couldn't be solved by doing. It could only be solved by being. He started small. 5 minutes a day. Just sitting in his home office with the door closed, watching his breath. His mind would immediately grab onto work thoughts, worry thoughts, planning thoughts. And he'd gently, patiently, bring it back. Not fighting the thoughts. Just noticing them and returning to the breath. Over months, something shifted. The frantic energy started to settle. Not because his life got easier. It didn't. The work demands were still there. The clients still needed him. But he was relating to it all differently. There was space now. Room to breathe. He started leaving work at 6. He started having dinner with his family without his phone on the table. He started sleeping through the night instead of waking at 3 a.m. with his mind racing. One evening, his teenage daughter asked him a question that stopped him cold. She said, "Dad, are you actually happy now? Or are you just less miserable?" Richard thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "I think I'm learning the difference." That difference is crucial. Most of us spend our lives trying to become less miserable. We think that's the same as being happy. We think if we can just reduce the pain, reduce the anxiety, reduce the dissatisfaction, will eventually arrive at happiness. But that's like thinking if you turn down the volume on static, you'll eventually hear music. Static turned down is still static. Music is something else entirely. The Buddha didn't teach the elimination of suffering. He taught the cessation of suffering. And cessation isn't elimination. Elimination is pushing something away. Cessation is letting something stop on its own. Like a fire that goes out when it runs out of fuel. The fuel is our grasping, our aversion, our ignorance. When those stop, suffering stops. Not because we fought it, but because we starved it. Richard started to experience moments of genuine happiness. Not the euphoric highs he chased in his 20s. Not the satisfaction of a deal closed or a bonus earned. Something quieter. Deeper. The simple pleasure of sitting on the porch with his wife, not saying anything, just watching the sunset. The warmth of his daughter's head on his shoulder during a movie. The taste of coffee in the morning when he actually tasted it instead of gulping it while reading emails. These moments weren't dramatic. They were ordinary. But they were real. And they were available all along, hidden beneath the frantic doing he'd mistaken for living. This is the invitation for all of us. Not to add more to your life. Not to achieve more, acquire more, become more. But to subtract. To let go of the constant reaching. To stop running long enough to notice what's already here. The peace you're seeking isn't in some future moment when everything finally falls into place. It's buried under all the striving. Under all the stories. Under all the fear. Dig it out. Not by adding, but by removing. Not by becoming, but by being. Let me share a story about a woman named Francine. Francine was an artist. Not the kind who makes a living from her art. The kind who works as a waitress and paints in a tiny studio apartment at night. She'd been painting since she was a child, and it was the only thing that made her feel fully alive. But Francine had a problem. She was a perfectionist. Every painting had to be brilliant. Every brushstroke had to be exactly right. She'd spend weeks on a piece, then destroy it because some tiny detail wasn't perfect. She'd start another, work obsessively, then destroy that one too. Her studio was filled with the ghosts of abandoned creations. One day, a friend brought her to a meditation center. Francine wasn't interested in meditation. She was interested in learning to paint without suffering. The teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, listened to Francine's story. Then she said something unexpected. Your problem isn't that you're a perfectionist. Your problem is that you believe perfection is possible. Francine was stunned. Of course perfection was possible. She'd seen it in museums. In the works of the masters. In the paintings that made her weep with their beauty. But the teacher shook her head. Those paintings aren't perfect. They're complete. There's a difference. Perfection is an idea in your mind. Completion is a reality in the world. You're chasing an idea, and it's killing your ability to create. The teacher gave Francine an assignment. For the next month, she had to paint something every day. But there was a catch. She wasn't allowed to keep any of it. Every evening, at the end of her session, she had to destroy whatever she'd painted. Tear it up. Paint over it. Throw it away. Francine thought this was insane. Why create something just to destroy it? But she agreed to try. The first week was agony. She'd spend hours on a small piece, then have to destroy it. Her hand would shake as she reached for the brush to paint over it. But she followed the instruction. The second week, something started to shift. She noticed she was painting more freely. Less attached to each stroke because she knew it wouldn't last. More playful. More experimental. The third week, she found herself actually enjoying the process for the first time in years. Not worrying about the outcome because there was no outcome. Just the pure act of painting. By the end of the month, Francine had learned something profound. The suffering in her art had never been about the quality of her work. It had been about her attachment to the result. Her need for the painting to be something. To prove something. To last forever. When she let go of that, the creativity flowed freely. She started painting again, and this time she kept some of it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was alive. This is the heart of the Buddhist teaching on attachment. Not that you shouldn't love things or care about things, but that you shouldn't cling to them. Clinging is the desperate attempt to hold on to something that is, by its nature, impermanent. It's like trying to hold a handful of water. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it runs through your fingers. Opening your hand doesn't mean you don't have water. It means the water is cupped gently, present but not imprisoned. You can enjoy it without the terror of losing it because you already know it will eventually evaporate. That knowledge doesn't make the water less precious. It makes it more precious. Let me tell you about another person. A man named Stephen who was dying. Not metaphorically. Actually dying. Cancer that had spread too far to treat. He had maybe 6 months. Stephen came to talk because he was terrified. Not of death itself. Of wasted life. Of all the years he'd spent chasing things that didn't matter. Of all the moments he'd rushed through to get to somewhere else. He asked me, how do I make these last months meaningful? And I said, you don't have to make them meaningful. They already are. Every moment of a human life is meaningful. The question is whether you show up for it or not. Stephen started showing up. He sat on his porch and watched the sunrise. Really watched it. Not thinking about something else. Not mentally elsewhere. Just present with the light changing the sky. He talked to his wife without looking at his phone. He listened to his daughter's stories without interrupting or advising. He felt the pain in his body without running from it or drugging it away. He let himself be sad. Let himself be afraid. Let himself be grateful. In his last weeks, Stephen told me something I'll never forget. He said, I wasted so much time being somewhere else. But these last months, even with all the pain, have been the richest of my life. I finally understand what it means to be here. Stephen didn't find meaning. He stopped looking for it. And in that stopping, he found everything. I want to tell you about a woman named Harriet. Harriet was 83 years old when I met her at a retreat center in the mountains. She walked with a cane, slowly, deliberately. Her hands were knotted with arthritis. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be. But her eyes. Her eyes were clear and bright and young. younger than any 20-year-old I'd ever seen. Harriet had buried 2 husbands. She'd outlived most of her friends. Her body hurt every morning when she woke up. And yet, she was one of the happiest people I've ever encountered. Not giddy happy. Not the happiness of someone who doesn't know suffering. But the deep, grounded happiness of someone who has made peace with everything. With loss. With limitation. With death. One evening, I asked her secret. She laughed and said, "Honey, I don't have a secret. I just stopped fighting. That's all. I spent the first 60 years of my life fighting reality. Fighting aging. Fighting loss. Fighting the way things were. Then one day, I realized fighting reality is like fighting the ocean. You can be very busy and very tired, but the ocean doesn't notice. It just keeps being the ocean." Harriet had discovered what the Buddha called the end of dukkha. Not the end of pain. Not the end of loss. Not the end of aging and death. Those continued. Still do. The end of fighting. The end of the internal war against what is. And in that peace, she found a happiness that circumstances couldn't touch. This is the final instrument. The one that holds all the others together. It's the willingness to be with what is. Not liking it necessarily. Not wanting it to stay. Not wanting it to go. Just being willing to be present for it. Psychologists call this radical acceptance. The Buddha called it equanimity. It's the 4th quality of the heart, along with loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas. Thomas was a veteran. He'd served 2 tours in a war zone and carried the memories with him every day. Not just memories. Nightmares. Hypervigilance. A startle response that left his family walking on eggshells. He'd tried therapy. Tried medication. Tried support groups. Nothing fully reached the pain. Someone suggested a meditation program designed for veterans. Thomas was skeptical. He thought meditation was for people who'd never faced real danger. But he was desperate enough to try anything. The program taught something specific. Not relaxation. Not stress reduction. But something called turning toward. Instead of trying to make the traumatic memories go away, they taught him to turn toward them with curiosity and compassion. To notice where he felt them in his body. To breathe into the tightness. To say to himself, "It's okay. This is just a memory. It can't hurt you now." The first few times, Thomas couldn't do it. The memories were too intense. He'd shake and sweat and have to stop. But slowly, gradually, he started to build capacity. He'd stay with the discomfort for 1 breath. Then 2. Then 10. He discovered something surprising. When he stopped fighting the memories, they started to change. Not disappear. But lose their charge. They became just images, just sensations, just stories from the past instead of ongoing threats in the present. Thomas told me later, "I spent 20 years running from things that happened 20 years ago. Running kept them alive. When I finally stopped running and turned around, they weren't as big as I thought. They were still there. They'll always be there. But I'm not running anymore. And that changes everything. This is the deepest teaching. The thing we fear most. Pain, loss, death, failure, loses its power when we stop running. Not because it disappears. Because we discover we're bigger than it. We discover that awareness itself is vast enough to hold anything. The worst memory. The deepest grief. The most terrifying fear. All of it can be held in awareness without destroying awareness. Without even damaging awareness. Awareness is like the sky. The worst storm in history passes through, and when it's gone, the sky is exactly as it was. Unmarked. Untouched. Limitless. We've traveled a long road together in these hours. From the empty mailbox to the 4 instruments. From the 8 worldly winds to the discovery that you are the sky, not the cloud. From Marcus in his corner office to Harriet with her clear eyes and peaceful heart. From David's anxiety to Chloe's healing. From Richard's collapse to Francine's liberation. And now we arrive at the end. But endings, in the Buddhist way of seeing, are really just beginnings in disguise. Every ending is a door. Every conclusion is an invitation to start again, this time with a little more wisdom, a little more openness, a little more heart. Let me leave you with one final story. It's about a woman named Nora who came to a monastery in Burma many years ago. Nora was a journalist from London. She'd covered wars and famines and political upheavals. She'd interviewed presidents and rebels and refugees. She'd seen the worst of humanity and it had left her hollow. Not depressed exactly. Just hollow. Empty. Like a drum that had been beaten too many times and now produced no sound. She wasn't looking for enlightenment. She was looking for a reason to keep living. Just one reason. That's all she wanted. The monastery was simple. Sparse cells, bare floors, the sound of chanting at dawn. No heat in the winter. No fans in the summer. Just the basics. Nora was assigned a small room with a mat for sleeping and a cushion for sitting. She was told to meditate. Just sit and watch her breath. No philosophy. No doctrine. No answers to her big questions. Just breathing in and breathing out. The teacher said, "Your mind is like a glass of muddy water. Stop shaking it and the mud will settle. Then you'll see what's always been there, hidden by the agitation." The first weeks were torture. Her mind was a relentless machine of memories and regrets and fears. Images from the wars she'd covered. Faces of children who'd died. Words spoken in anger years ago. Regrets about roads not taken. She'd sit for an hour and spend 59 minutes lost in thought, only realizing at the bell that she'd been somewhere else entirely. She wanted to leave. She wanted to go back to London where at least the distractions were familiar. But something kept her there. A tiny flicker of curiosity. A sense that maybe, just maybe, there was something beneath all the noise. Something real. Months passed. The thoughts didn't stop. They never stop, not really. But something else started to appear. Small gaps between them. Moments of stillness she'd never noticed before. In those gaps, she felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the absence of pain. Not the resolution of her questions. Just peace. Pure and simple and completely independent of circumstances. It didn't depend on the news from London. It didn't depend on her health or her mood or whether she'd slept well. It was just there, always, waiting to be noticed. One day, she was sitting as usual when a sound arose. A bird singing outside her window. She heard it. Fully heard it. Not as a distraction from her meditation but as part of the meditation itself. Not as something separate from her but as something arising within the same field of awareness. And in that moment, something opened. She saw that the bird singing and the silence between thoughts and the pain in her knees and the grief in her heart and the awareness noticing all of it were not separate. They were one single, seamless, living moment. And that moment was perfect. Not in the way an idea is perfect. In the way reality is perfect. Complete. Whole. Lacking nothing. Nora didn't become enlightened in the way we imagine. She didn't float off her cushion or receive a vision of the Buddha. She didn't suddenly know all the answers to all the questions. But she did receive something. A knowing. A direct, undeniable knowing that underneath all the seeking, underneath all the suffering, underneath all the stories, there was already peace. Already wholeness. Already home. And that knowing changed everything. Not because it eliminated her problems. Because it showed her that she was bigger than her problems. That the awareness holding her problems was untouched by them. Like the sky holding a storm, unmarked when the storm passes. She stayed at the monastery for another year, not to find something, but to deepen her capacity to rest in what she'd found. Then she went back to London. Back to journalism. Back to the world with all its chaos and pain. But she went back different. The world hadn't changed. She had. Or rather, she discovered what had always been true but was hidden under the layers of seeking and striving and suffering. She discovered that the meaning she'd been hunting for in war zones and interviews and achievements had been here all along, in the simple fact of being alive and aware. This is the invitation for you. Not to move to a monastery. Not to renounce the world. Not to become someone other than who you are. But to discover what's already here beneath the noise. The peace you're seeking isn't in some future moment when all your problems are solved. It's buried under all the thoughts about your problems. Dig it out. Not by adding more. By subtracting. By sitting still. By breathing. By noticing. By being willing to be exactly where you are, with exactly what's here, without needing it to be different. Let's return to the beginning. To that empty mailbox in the wide field. You've spent your life checking it, hoping for a letter that never comes. But look around. Really look. The field isn't empty. It's full. Full of grass bending in the wind. Full of sky stretching endlessly above. Full of your own breath moving in and out. Full of aliveness pulsing through every cell. The mailbox was never the point. The point was the field. The point was you, standing in it, awake and aware and alive. The letter was never coming because you were never supposed to receive meaning. You were supposed to create it. moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. The meaning of life isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a reality to experience. It's not in the future, waiting to be achieved. It's in this moment, waiting to be noticed. The question, what is the meaning of life, dissolves when you realize you are life asking the question. You are not a separate self looking for meaning. You are meaning itself, temporarily disguised as a seeker. The seeker and the sought are one. The question and the answer are the same. The path and the destination are not two different things. So here's what I want you to do. When this recording ends, don't rush to the next thing. Don't immediately grab your phone or turn on the TV or check your email. Just sit for a moment. 1 minute. 2 minutes. As long as you can. Feel your breath. Feel your body. Feel the aliveness that's always here but rarely noticed. Let yourself arrive. Fully arrive in this moment. Because this moment, right here, is the only moment you'll ever have. The past is memory. The future is imagination. But this is real. This is where life happens. This is where love happens. This is where you happen. And in this real moment, ask yourself not, what is the meaning of life, but how will I live this moment? With kindness, with presence, with openness, with love, with courage, with honesty. That's the only question that matters. Because how you live this moment is how you live your life. And how you live your life is the meaning you create. There is no other meaning. There never was. Thank you for spending these hours with me at Monk's Temple. Thank you for your attention, your openness, your willingness to explore these ancient teachings in a modern world. Thank you for showing up, for listening, for being willing to question everything you thought you knew. The path doesn't end here. It begins here. In this moment. With this breath. With you, exactly as you are, lacking nothing. If these teachings have touched you, if they've opened something or shifted something or simply reminded you of what you already knew, please share them. Not by telling someone about this recording. By living them. By being the kind of presence that reminds others of their own wholeness. By being the kind of person who doesn't need a letter because you're too busy living in the field. That's how the teaching spreads. Not through words but through lives. Through you. Through your kindness. Through your presence. Through your willingness to be fully human in a world that often encourages us to be anything but. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be free. May you discover that what you've been seeking your whole life has been here all along, waiting for you to stop seeking long enough to notice. May you find the courage to stop running. The wisdom to turn toward what scares you. And the love to hold it all with kindness. This is Nora's gift to us. This is the Buddha's gift. This is your own true nature, offering itself in every moment, in every breath, in every heartbeat. All that's required is that you show up. That you pay attention. That you stop waiting for the letter and start living in the field. The field is waiting. The sun is warm. The grass is soft. And you are here. fully here. And that is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. Go well, friend. Go in peace. Go in love. And remember, when you forget all of this, as you will, just come back to the breath. Just one breath. That's all it takes to come home.